I'm here today with two gentlemen we've flown in. Nathan Lee is coming to us from the far reaches of Japan. Thank you for joining us.
No problem.
I've also got a master's in history, Marc Koechl.
Thank you, thank you.
And each of these gentlemen will be arguing the merits of their game. So tell us what your game is, and why don't we start with you, Mr. Lee.
All right. My game is 1960, The Making of a President by Z-Man Games. A fabulous reenactment of the election between eventually President Kennedy and Richard Nixon back in 1960. So, excellent game.
I'm going to be discussing today with you the Twilight Struggle game, a GMT stellar production, a game that puts you into the mode of the Cold War, what it felt like to be there, the trials, tribulations, etc. And I really look forward to sharing this game with you.
This game is educational because it recreates the feelings and the tensions involved in a real election. So if you have a student that's interested in political science or any even history, this game will give that sense of that build up to the final election day and the tension and the craziness that goes with it.
When you play a real game and you're ready to play a real game, you're going to play Twilight Struggle, Nate. And in Twilight Struggle, it's actually divided into thirds, so you actually have a better chance to experience certain parts of the Cold War on a chronology scale, and it's a wonderful opportunity for history students to really dive into some of those important historical events.
Well, I would argue that's great. It is, covers the span of the Cold War, but are you really getting in depth into any individual event? It's the span of it is just too broad for a specific lesson plan. If you're going to be teaching a lesson, you want it to have a clear point. This will focus in on a single election event and allow the students to really grasp the history.
One of the biggest flaws of your game is that it doesn't more divide the game into particular sections of the election campaign, which was wonderful.
What's the advantage of that?
It's the advantage of that. You can actually focus in on one particular, for example, the Fidel Castro card in Twilight Struggle. It allows you to take a look at Cuba. So a teacher, a history teacher, or a political science teacher could take a look at just that Fidel Castro card, explain about what its significance was in Cuba, in the global scale. What a wonderful opportunity. And then it also puts it in the context of chronology. That was in the early war phases of the Cold War. So whereas it's a real mishmash in 1960 of all these events happening and you never know what's going to happen, Twilight Struggle does a far better job of breaking it down into its proper category.
As a teacher, there's 120 cards in that box. As a teacher, do you have time to cover any of those or a scope of those events in any depth? It's going to be just surface. This focuses in on a nice time frame. It does divide the election. You have the lead up to the debates, and then you have the debate. You actually recreate the debate, debating issues, and then you go into the final phase of campaigning like crazy to get those last few states to flip to support you.
You would have things like the nuclear track, right, where you have the DEFCON increasing in scope. So
It's pronounced DEFCON.
I like to call it DEFCON, okay? Star Wars reference. Which actually recreates that whole nuclear clock idea where it was 1 minute to midnight, okay, in which millions of people across the world experienced.
It's very educational in the sense that you can actually get the feeling of what it's like to run a real campaign.
Twilight Struggle, yes, you have to mitigate events, just as in the Cold War. Events had to be mitigated. You had to look at different events. Ronald Reagan in, say, the late stage war, where, and then in his influence in the Cold War and how the Soviets had to respond. So all these wonderful historical events, rich with information, breadth and depth, and how you had to mitigate them on either side. Whereas in 1960, yeah, you can have an event and the other person can choose to activate it if they spend some of their own money. You don't have that option in Twilight Struggle. It must activate. It must happen. And you, with your savvy as a player, have to figure out the best way to make it happen.
I think this game is relevant to Canadian students. Once again, this is a great opportunity to learn about how the American election system differs from the Canadian electoral system, and just from a history perspective, America's our biggest neighbor, a huge contributor to world history, and I mean certainly Kennedy had a lot of romance attached to his presidency. So this is a chance for us to learn about our largest neighbor to the south.
The Twilight Struggle game, however, wonderful opportunity to look at a global scale and Canada within the global community.
As far as ease of learning, I would say 1960 is it's something that you could easily teach the basics to and have someone actually start up and play really within a few minutes. It's not that difficult. There's a few kind of tricky rules around how the media factors in and that kind of thing, but it's not that tricky. It's just it helps to have the player aid beside you for your first game or so. But after that, it's quite intuitive. Most kids have experienced elections, watching elections and that sort of thing, so they have an idea of how that is supposed to work. And so for that reason, I think it's a fairly easy game to pick up with someone guiding them through the first couple turns.
It would be a challenge to learn, but therein lies the gem of this game. In the process of learning, you are learning about the war itself, you're learning about the trials and tribulations, and a wonderful chance for you to learn about this great event.
1960 is a ton of fun, and because it's so intuitive, the kids would have the ability to kind of pick up the game basically right from the beginning and run with it, and there's so much back and forth, and as my opponent has so kindly granted, their balance is really great, and so it really everything swings back and forth. So there's a lot of drama, and it's a lot of fun for that reason.
I think when you talk about fun, you really need to look at some of the ratings. And if you go to BoardGameGeek.com, Twilight Struggle is the #1 rated game. It's a lot of fun because you are actually reliving this war. It was like a psychological struggle, and it really the game does an amazing job of having you feel like you are part of that Cold War experience, the part of that Cold War, those wheels of war turning.
There is a ton of stuff that can be done with 1960. For example, the debate that happened in 1960 between Kennedy and Nixon was the first televised debate ever. And you get a real sense of learning the media. For example, Kennedy was credited with looking great on camera, whereas Nixon was panned for not shaving properly and sitting awkwardly. So you can actually see a lot of the media stuff at work in terms of marketing yourself. There's a ton of events that happen in the game that they're very well chronicled. It was very recent history, so relatively speaking, so there's a lot of stuff on film you can watch afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, because one of the cards I do like the best in that game is the Lazy Shave card, which is a debate event. In Twilight Struggle, we have an excellent opportunity for history teachers to look at a revisionist history with their upper level students, higher level thinking students. You can take the events of any of the third of the wars, early, middle, or late, and actually reshuffle them, retool them, have the students retry them, place them out in a different chronology, see what might have happened in different contexts. So it's a great chance for, and this would be in the 3s and 4Us, but a great chance for those students to look at that concept.
One of the things with Twilight Struggle is that if a player knows the cards well, if he's played a few times and knows the cards ahead of time, that's a huge advantage over someone that's newer to the game. A lot of the historical events only affect certain countries. For example, there's not a lot of events affecting Tunisia or something like that, but there's some that, for example, Korea with the Korean War, or various events that took place historically. So it's good to know there's some target countries which can be affected by events that it helps to have the knowledge of the cards.
To that point, Mr. Lee, what's wonderful about Twilight Struggle is you can bring a country like Tunisia much more into the game if you wish. As either player, you can add pieces into that country, making it more of a focal point, and that again changes that history and a revisionist idea. And I love that about this game. That any country in any point in any game can be significant.
I would argue that in 1960 you have that opportunity as well to make a revisionist history of exactly what went on. You know, depending on how the cards fall and how they're played, can really change the election, but gives the players the opportunity to kind of reshape history in a way that's quite interesting. The students wouldn't be mixed up by the reordering of events or whatever, because all the events are there. They all happen within the game. And so it's just a matter of, you could view it almost as certain events maybe happening but not having the same impact that they did historically. So even though they actually occur, you know, some were more important depending on the situation of the game at that point.
And you could definitely argue that actually with each event, it's about the event. The students are learning about that particular event in its greater context of the election or of the Cold War.
1960 has great history, has the nice build-up of a campaign or an actual election, and is quite simple and intuitive to learn. Great game, great opportunity to teach some history and some politics to students.
One of the reasons this game is great is because you can actually use it in the classroom effectively. It is because of the 3 stages. You can take one stage, play that in a period, and then continue. I also love it because the tension starts from minute 1 and doesn't stop. As well, the cards, the historical events in the cards really lend themselves nicely to teaching specific events of the Cold War.
Thank you for your debate today, gentlemen. Some excellent points here, and I have clearly made up my mind.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Play Twilight Struggle.
How did you watch?
Sorry.
Afterwards, how many words did you say?
It was just the blood. When I got zooming in, all I could see was these freckles of blood.
One more. Too big. Gotta make it small, they don't see.
That's real.
I know. It's real. It hurts.
A man who works hard for his craft.
Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. I do it for the struggle.
You just find that razor on the ground and seriously, you need to invest in an electric razor, dude.